Mindfulness gives the client the skill to regulate their mood. If the client can learn to get a better sense of what's going on in their body, the feelings that are coming up, it can give them a signal perhaps to become more aware of they've got a depressive moment coming up, or they're feeling more anxious, and get a bit of distance from that and frame what's happening in a much more mindful way. The point is, mindfulness teaches us that we are not our thoughts, and ultimately we are not identified with our feelings. Carlton Hall, who developed a mindfulness-based ecotherapy program, puts it very well. By focusing on our experience in the now, we come to realize that we are free to choose which thoughts and feelings to pay attention to and which thoughts and feelings not to focus on. Claire Thompson, who wrote the book Mindfulness in the Natural World, offers a very appropriate surfing analogy. You might imagine you're swimming in the sea, perhaps off the coast of Cornwall. The waves will take you wherever they please. But if you imagine you're on a surfboard, then you can ride those waves. Instead of being caught up in the swirl of the ocean and the waves, you can actually go on top of them and enjoy the ride over the waves and the turmoil. Mindfulness enables us to shift from doing mode, trying to fix something, to what we might call being mode, actually being in the moment. When we're in being mode, we're focused on the present moment. We aren't trying to fix anything, because in this particular moment right now, there is no past and there is no future. There's much more to mindfulness-based therapy, and we'll touch on other aspects later on, but I hope that's given you some context to frame what's going to come next, which is to begin to consider why mindfulness in nature. What's the added value? What does it bring to the bigger picture? So is mindfulness in nature some way more effective, or what does it add to doing a similar practice indoors? The exercises, the kind of things that you would do, are very similar. But involving nature, I think, can make a significant difference to how the actual experience itself. As to date, there doesn't seem to be any research that's comparing the two, mindfulness indoors or mindfulness outdoors. But there are some suggestions from the theory we already have that practicing outdoors would be more effective. First off, there's considerable evidence that natural environments in themselves are likely to produce something very akin to mindfulness. There's been some recent research by psychologists at the University of Derby, and they were looking at how short trips into a local rural landscape had an impact on a person's state of mind. So they drew on a year-long diary that documented 200 short trips into a rural environment, and then drew out of that sort of what key understandings they could come up with. They write, once the writer of the diaries had established a connection with nature, mindfulness became more evident in their writing, and a mindful approach emerged. They add a little bit later on, when immersed in the countryside, the writer was able to be present in the moment and experience the countryside in a non-judgmental way. Now, one of the key findings that I draw out of this research is there's no need to go off into a long retreat into the wilderness somewhere to get the benefits of nature connection. On the contrary, the visits they're talking about were into a semi-rural agricultural landscape, and they typically lasted no longer than an hour. Attention restoration theory has already been spoken about at the conference a couple of times. The theory suggests that natural phenomena like birdsong or the gentle sound of a stream provide sensory stimuli that are effortlessly fascinating, and that they naturally just promote a sense of well-being. Attention restoration theory was developed by environmental psychologists Rachel and Stephen Kaplan, and they distinguish between hard fascination, which is a very focused, direct attention, and soft fascination, which is an effortless process that just allows for quiet contemplation. Hard fascination is the sort of thing you probably would be typified by watching motorsport or some other kind of very focused entertainment. Whereas soft fascination, that experience would be typified by a walk in the park or in nature. This helps explain perhaps one of the reasons why nature has such a beneficial effect on us. Nature gives the thinking mind a rest, opens up our senses, and creates a space for us to collect our thoughts and gently focus them. Now, although soft fascination isn't the same as mindfulness, both do involve a similar kind of present-centered awareness. So it's perhaps no surprise, I think, to realize that natural environments are naturally conducive to creating a mindfulness kind of state. The other thing about a diverse natural environment is that it gives us a huge opportunity to practice our mindfulness skills. As we've seen, mindfulness is primarily concerned with focusing on the present moment, generally finding some sort of sensory object to focus the mind on. Nature can also offer us lessons in acceptance, help us become less judgmental, and by revealing our profound interconnectedness, facilitate greater compassion. I just want to consider some of these aspects of mindfulness in nature. First of those, impermanence and acceptance. As Heraclitus pointed out, we can never step into the same river twice. And this is a perfect example of the reality of impermanence. Coming to accept impermanence is pretty much a necessary aspect of our lives and will help us become freer and happier. Nature frequently models both change and acceptance. Claire Thompson, who I've referred to already, reflects on how nature teaches her these lessons. She says, "When I see trees growing on the edge of cliffs against the odds of wind and cold, birds puffing up their feathers to protect themselves from the cold in the winter, and wildflowers growing alongside railway lines, I am filled with a sense of humility. I see that the rest of the natural world doesn't complain or resist the offence of life over which it has no control. Learning to accept the things that we can't change in our lives, such as painful emotions, suffering, loss, or external events that hinder our goals, is at the heart of allowing greater contentment into our lives." So nature models acceptance for us. Compassion, both for self and for other. Feeling connected to life and other people is very important for our well-being and our general sense is very therapeutic. The philosopher of consciousness, Christian de Quincey, sums it up very well. We are constituted by webs of interconnection. Relationship comes first, and we emerge as more or less distinct centers within the vast and complex networks that surround us. Mindfulness in nature offers numerous opportunities to reveal our place in these networks of relationship. And by doing so, it helps to facilitate compassion for others and also compassion for ourselves. Developing deeper compassion is a central aspect of mindfulness, typically exemplified by the love and kindness meditation. The Buddhist ecotherapist Caroline Brazier describes her approach as an other-centered therapy. And a key aspect of that is to investigate and relate to others in a more direct, uncontaminated way. Mindfulness of the other, of course, isn't limited just to other human beings, and any aspect of nature can become the focus for our mindful attention. Caroline Brazier highlights the potential of such encounters. Mindful awareness directed towards another naturally flows from the encounter, and meeting is both ordinary and potentially transformational. Trying to experience this kind of mindful awareness of the other that Caroline's talking about may sound quite challenging, but we can learn to experience it in quite simple ways. Caroline Thompson suggests that the next time you're out walking in nature, you might just want to take a moment and just think, how is nature feeling? If you're with a friend, you might also be interested in how they're feeling, what they're thinking about the space. So in that moment, just with that very simple question, you're beginning to get a bit of awareness of our place within the broader interconnectedness. That sense of interconnectedness is another key aspect that I wanted to bring out. the Buddhist Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh suggests that the purpose of our life is to awaken from our illusion of separateness. While in our everyday experience, we probably tend to imagine that we are completely separate. There's a sense of, I am in this particular skin bag and everything else is very separate from me. But I'm sure all of us have at one time or another had that sense of that boundary blurring and that sense of us being part of a much, much bigger interconnected world. Going back to Claire Thompson again, she describes this experience rather beautifully. She was watching a sunset and she said, I didn't realize until afterwards, but my sense of self was absent. I was simply absorbed in the intrinsic wonder of the view and intimately involved in a deep contemplation of pure grace and the delicate beauty of nature. I was an integral part of the scene. Quite simply, being in nature can open us to that kind of sense of interconnectedness. And mindfulness is fundamentally concerned with enabling that same profound awareness. Experiencing that sense of connection between self and nature can have a profound impact on behaviour. And during my PhD research, I found that meditation was a common pathway for people to come to a deeper sense of connection. And that sense of connection was very much helped to inspire environmental activism. One participant described how meditation really got her attached to the earth. Getting up really early and just sitting still really focused my mind on what was happening outside. Doing that for a year really made me more aware of the web. I suppose I would just call it the web of life. Another participant explained to me that his connection with Earth had become a major part of who he was. Mindfulness in nature had become part of his everyday practice. And he said, just spending time out in nature, just listening, just looking, not really thinking too much. It's kind of good not to think, just become, just let it flow through you, I guess. Other researchers have found similar results. Mindfulness enhances the impact of our experience in nature and strengthens our nature connection. However, it's interesting that research into more conventional mindfulness is less clear-cut. They did some research on how environmentally active mindfulness practitioners were, and the results really weren't very, very clear at all. It seems that mindfulness encourages people to be more green, but in itself it's not sufficient to promote environmental behaviour. So, we've established from research that mindfulness is healing, and it's also very apparent that spending time in nature is very good for our mental well-being. So, although it's early days yet, I think that bringing the two together can create a synergy that's very powerful. So what does that look like in practice? I want to look at a couple of examples briefly of places that where this has been applied. There's something called the Healing Forest Garden in Arcadia, which is a project that was initiated by the University of Copenhagen. First patients came there in 2012. They were suffering from stress-related illness. And the whole centre of the project is to bring together permaculture, nature therapy, and mindfulness. They're drawing on the research I talked earlier about having a very diverse environment, so the whole project is based around an arboretum. We've seen that paying attention to natural phenomena and our sensory experience is central to mindfulness practice, so they bring that out of this particular project. They will teach people sensory awareness exercises in the healing garden. And that's the foundation of it. They start people there because that's quite an easy way in. And then they use that to get into the more challenging work, which is coming to accept whatever is there for you in the present moment, that process of learning acceptance. In Arcadia, that process of learning acceptance is enhanced through the experience of nature. They use gardening, which, as anybody who's done any gardening will realise, carries no guarantee of success. And that simple practice of caring for plants over a period of time and accepting that some of them will inevitably fail to thrive, despite our best efforts, is integrated into the whole process of the therapy out in Arcadia to help people get a real sense of building that sense of acceptance into their lives. The seasonal cycle of the natural environment is also a perfect example of learning acceptance. The changeable weather and the cycle of the seasons offer us examples of the inevitability of change. Winter will come and the leaves will fall. Paying mindful attention to the natural change provides us with an ever-present opportunity to learn non-judgmental acceptance in a dramatic but non-threatening context. There's other models of mindfulness in nature. I've mentioned Carlton Hall, who's a family therapist from Carolina, who's created a 12-week mindfulness in nature program. He does include some classic mindfulness in nature processes in there, like watching the breath or focusing on sensory awareness, but he also brings in some work on nature with metaphor and elements of Celtic and Native American spirituality. Caroline Brazier's ecotherapy, being based in Buddhist practice, inevitably brings in quite a bit of mindfulness. It's somewhat less eclectic than Carlton Hall's, and if a Buddhist approach attracts you, then it's highly recommended. There's lots of other therapists working outdoors who bring in some element of mindfulness in nature in a less systematic way. And there's a lovely book by a therapist called Ruth Bates, who's based in Seattle, and she describes her own work in a book called Wild Communion. Now, she doesn't in that book talk about bringing that work into her client work, but if you want some inspiration on how you might work with nature or connect with it more deeply, that book's very much recommended. So mindfulness in nature as a therapeutic practice is, I feel, still in quite an early stage, but we know enough to begin to bring it into our work. So how might you actually facilitate mindfulness in nature yourself? So based on current research, I think there's lots of clients that this could be helpful for. Certainly stress and anxiety, and I think probably mild to moderate depression as well. At the risk of stating the obvious, the first point is if you're going to be doing mindfulness in nature with people, you need to have your own practice. So getting that established is absolutely fundamental. The next question is, where are you going to do it? Local parks are actually very good for this sort of thing, as long as you're reasonably confident that it's not going to be too noisy. But in practice, you, as people have said here over the weekend, you're very unlikely to be disturbed. People just let you get on with it. Doesn't need to be a large space, but somewhere as much diversity as you can find is ideal. I've got a couple of slides here. These are taken in a local park in Exeter. As you can see from this one, it's quite diverse. There's some little pockets of quite wild bits. Other areas are really much more conventional. So different spaces that you can work in a park like that quite well. I've also worked in this is quite a quiet park. I've worked in a busier park right in the middle of Exeter, and it was absolutely fine. So when choosing your space, think about suitability for the client group, but in general, you should be pretty safe in a park. Comfort is a key consideration. Some of the mindfulness exercises can be quite static. So in winter months, you've got to stay warm. There's a lovely quote from the Arctic explorer Ranulph Fiennes. There's no such thing as bad weather. There's just inappropriate clothing. That said, when you're trying to do some touchy-feely stuff with a pair of gloves on, it doesn't really work very well. But there's lots of ways that you can adapt it. And exercises like mindful walking or listening in nature are two classic approaches that can be adapted very well to almost any circumstances. So I'm going to share another couple of short exercises that you might like to experiment with. If you're with a client who's, or perhaps you are yourself, really getting lots of thoughts going around in your head, really persistent internal dialogue, what you can try is to actually out-talk your thinking mind. So just, you'll be out somewhere beautiful, you'll be in the natural world, and just naming what it is that you see out loud, and do it as loud as you need to stop the thoughts in the head. Wow, that's such a beautiful green leaf there. God, and that tree is fabulous. Oh, and I can just feel the breeze just right against my skin. That kind of thing, just describing your experience out loud will help you to become more mindful of what actually is going on in the here and now, and can enable you to sort of out-talk the internal dialogue that's going on. Ideally, if you can use quite sensory language, that's really helpful. That helps to make it a little bit more rich. And something you can try, if it's appropriate, is to sometimes you get a single word or a series of words and you can build them into a very simple haiku, almost like a little poem that you can use on each out-breath. Beauty, green, flowers, scent, that kind of thing. And that's very calming, and again is bringing you into awareness of what your sensory awareness is. Another approach is to contemplate the elements. We touched on this again already, both within your body and out in the physical world. We share the physical elements with nature. We are nature. It's all part of one. Sensing the chill cold of a winter's day on your skin, the touch of a breeze, or the warmth of the sun, reveals to you that the skin actually connects us to the world. It doesn't separate us from it. Each breath is drawn into our lungs and then released. We are actually in constant relationship with what is outside us. And as I'm breathing, as I exhale, I'm inhaling what the plants have given out. So there is that reciprocity going on. Our lives are part of the flow of nature. We take in water, we give out, it passes through us. Our bodies have grown from the earth and are nourished by the sun. That kind of awareness practice can bring us to an understanding of our oneness and break down that distinction that we tend to sense between self and other, which is completely artificial. We're all made of the same elemental elements. We are all the same process. There's a lovely way to end the day is to do a gratitude meditation based on nature. So you may be familiar with this. In the evening of your day, you just sit down and either with a journal or just with yourself. Just make a list of maybe 5 things in nature that you've seen that day that you really appreciated. The blue of the sky, the chill crisp of the air, the autumn leaves, sparkling ice, or maybe even the apple that you enjoyed at your lunchtime. And as you're doing that, you're just bringing appreciative thoughts. Just remembering that blue sky and think, wow, that was so beautiful, that sky. I really got so much from that. And that crisp frost, or the dew I saw on that spider's leaf, wow, it was a beautiful thing and it really touched me. So feeling how that is, to that sense of gratitude that comes from nature, and noticing how that feels in your body is really important. That's a really simple exercise, the sort of thing you might want to try this evening. You've had an opportunity to be in nature today, and you might want to just do a simple nature gratitude. There's lots of other ways to work. There's some in the books that I've mentioned, and just through your own practice of being in nature and experimenting, I think that's where some of the best ideas can come from. So, just to conclude, I've looked at the therapeutic value of mindfulness, discussed what mindfulness in nature can add to that, and looked at some examples of how it actually works in practice. And I've also given you some ideas of how you might facilitate it yourself. I find this a very exciting time for us working in this area, exploring factual therapy in the outside world, and we're learning all the time. We're drawing on the richness of other fields, and we're also digging down into the deep richness of the practice itself. I would say that mindfulness in nature isn't it isn't on its own, but can be integrated into our general practice of therapy outside. So it's an add-on, it's kind of an additional element that you can bring to add to the richness of your work. Just to close, there's a very beautiful poem that's from Ruth Bates's book called Wild Communion. I just want to share with you because it kind of sums it all up for me. Before I enter nature, I want to remember. I come here to get out of my head and into my senses, to immerse myself in peace and beauty, to feel kinship with life, to feel at home. I come here to be empty, silent, still, receptive. I come here to be changed, to get new perspective, to find an answer, to heal a wound, to learn. I come here to be wild, to be engulfed by wildness and mystery and wonder. I come here to worship, to thank, to praise, to love. Thank you.